Hi, this is Donna. Welcome to DD Paper Crafts. In today's video, we're going to be making a gift box, which is 6 inches wide, 4 inches high and 2 inches deep. The difference with this particular box is if I release the top, this piece comes down the front and we have a pop-up element to the front of the box. I will go through the various stages, including points to be aware of when you're making the pop-ups. I'm not saying my way is the right way, I will just show the way that I found easiest. You can of course resize this to suit your particular needs. It's just a simple box with a cover. So let's put the project together. We'll start with the box element, and this is going to be made up of 2 pieces. The first is 7 inches by 10 inches. Along the 7-inch side, score at half, 4.5 and 6.5, and along the 10-inch side, score at 2 and 8, and then at 1.5, score down to the second score line, so the score line at 2.5, and then do the same at 8.5. The second piece for the box element is 7 inches by 4.5 inches. Along the 7-inch side, score at half and 6.5, and along the 4.5-inch side, score at half. We'll start with the biggest piece, and we're going to fold and burnish along all of the longer score lines. Take your scissors and you'll have your piece in this orientation, so the additional score lines are at the top. We're going to start by creating the base tabs along this segment here. So we'll cut up each of the score lines up to the long 1/2-inch score line, and then we'll take a wedge from the end of each of these tabs. The box is not going to have a base of its own. The base is incorporated within the front flap. I'm going to move along to what will be the second score line. So it's the end of this full score line, and cut up to the 1/2-inch. And then move to the right to the next score line and cut up to the 1/2-inch. So this element here in the middle is the lid flap. Rotate, so that's on the right. I'm going to cut up this second score line up to the long horizontal, like so. Cut up the next score line, so that removes this section. Rotate and cut along the additional score line. So this is creating the flap which is going to sit down inside the box. And I'm going to take a very slight wedge from each end of these, but I might need to adjust these later on once I put the lid down into the box. Rotate 180 degrees. We're going to repeat that process at the other end. And because it's my personal preference, I'm going to round off the corners of the front tab. So that's the first piece of the box. We'll bring in the second piece, and again we'll fold and burnish along each of the score lines. I'm going to remove these corner squares, and then shape each of these glue tabs by taking a wedge from the ends of each. We take our largest piece, so we'll add glue onto the glue tabs either side of the smaller piece, and then this is going to sit in the front like so to form the box. I'm going to use my construction glue because this is quite a heavyweight cardstock. Flip this piece over and adhere this together, and concentrate on your lower score lines because you can always trim the top if you need to. And now I can add glue onto this glue tab, fold in the base tabs, and I'm just going to sit that up, fold the lid in, and just see if I need to shape any of these side flaps. I'm going to just shape that slightly because that's just catching at the top. So that fits down there nicely and snugly. And the one thing I omitted to do was add a finger notch into the front here, so I can get my circle punch in. I can get the lid, let's just pop the lid out from underneath. So this is the bare bones of our box element. When you've put the box together, the next thing you want to do before we prepare the next section is add your DSP onto the top of the box if you're going to have it, and also consider your handle. Now I'm going to have a very thin border on mine, so my DSP is going to be 5 7/8 by 1 7/8. You may want to go for the more traditional 5 3/4 by 1 3/4. So that's going to sit on the top like so. And as I say, the next thing to consider is your handle, because this will determine the size of slot that you cut in the next piece. I've made a handle here. The slot that I cut for my handle needs to be, I'm going to cut it to 4 3/4 of an inch long, and it needs to be at least 1 inch. So I'm going to cut 4 3/4 by 1 1/4 inches. I'm going to get my DSP stuck into place and add my handle on, because as well as the size of the handle, we also need to be considering the positioning of the handle to make sure that we cut our slot into the right place. And of course, this will vary on everyone's project depending on the size of handle they decide to add on. If indeed they decide to add a handle on at all, you can of course just create the front flap and the exterior lid of the box and not have a handle on the piece at all, and therefore you wouldn't need to have the slot. So that's going to sit on there. So I'm going to measure in 3/4 of an inch from either end and mark with a pencil lightly. That will be there. So let's lay this on and see whether that fits within the pencil lines, which it does, like so. And then I want to place it 1/2 inch from the top and 1/2 inch from the bottom. My handle is now stuck between the various pencil lines. So that's my box element. Next we'll put together the element which is the front flap, the lid, the front and the base of the box. This is 6 inches wide and I've cut my piece to 1/16 of an inch over 8.5 inches. I'm going to use small Velcro dots on the lid flap section here, and I've allowed 1/2 inch for that. My first score line is at 1/2 inch. Now, depending on what method you're going to use for adhesion, if you're using hook and loop dots and they're a bigger size, you may want to extend your cardstock accordingly so that you can have a longer flap. So you could have an inch flap by extending the cardstock by another 1/2 inch. Along the long side, I'm scoring at 1/2 inch and 2 inches. So this is the lid element. Rotate 180 degrees and then score at 2 inches. And what this does, this gives us an extra 1/16 of an inch in this section here, which allows for the pop-up supports, which are going to fold up in between the front of the box and the back of this section. The next thing I'm going to do is mark in where I need to cut the slot for the handle. You can see here I do have my slot marked, however I've skipped a process in that ideally what you want to do is add your patterned paper onto the top of the lid section before you mark your slot, so that when you cut the slot you can cut through the cardstock and the patterned paper at the same time. So I'll add this on and then I will remark on the reverse where my slot is going to be. So I'm going to put the piece back in the scoreboard and flip it over. So my first cut line is lined up with 1 inch down the side, and I marked from 5/8 from the left hand side along to 5/8 from the right hand side. And my next line is going to be down at 2 inches, and again I'm going to mark from 5/8 of an inch from the left across to 5/8 an inch from the right. I won't glue this on until I've tested the slot, so we can cut along the remaining pencil lines. So that's my slot. Now I'm going to fold and burnish along the score lines. So this is the front notch, so this will come over the top like so. I want to make sure the slot is big enough for the handle to fit through, and whether I can wrap the piece around the base, which I can. So when that's adhered to the base, that will come up and over, and you can see that's just slightly catching on the handle on that side. I'm going to just extend the slot by another 1/8 of an inch so that that then fits comfortably over the handle. So now let's lay the piece back on again. So this would be adhered to this. This is going to come up the front, and then that is going to come over the top, and that will go over the handles quite neatly. I'm going to add glue onto the glue tabs. Make sure everything's the right way round. My notch is sitting to the inside. Make sure the base gets lined up. And before that sticks down, I'm going to pull the front up again, pull that over, get the top and the sides lined up. So that will fit on there quite nicely. Then I'm just going to fold it over, hold it in my hand because obviously I've got the handle, and just burnish. Let's open the box and just go in on the inside and burnish the tabs down. So now we're going to make our pop-up element, and before you do anything you want to add any decorative paper to the front of the box here, and any decorative paper to this section here. You either want to think about the placements of your pop-ups, because the arms are obviously going to adhere onto this place, or work on this back panel first and then work your placement of your pop-ups around this. So I'm going to add this record into place first, and then I had a die cut from a magazine set, and that's going to create the stylus like so. Now I'm just going to recheck my lid, because do remember that any dimension that you add onto this front bit is going to affect this front piece coming up and over. So you do want to take that into consideration at all time. I'm now going to start to add my pop-up elements in, and I'm starting with strips which are 1/2 inch wide. I've scored at 1/2 inch from one end, and then rotated 1/2 inch and 1 inch. So this section here will sit on the front of the box. This first section will sit on the base element, and then this second section my element will be stuck to. Thing to bear in mind is the size of your image. Your image is going to move up as the piece closes. So for instance, if I wanted to put this image in, I would have to make sure I put it at an angle like this, because otherwise as the box closes I'm going to end up with the top of the guitar over the front, and therefore the piece isn't going to work. So it does require a little bit of planning. What I would recommend is, if you have something like some white tack or maybe some blue tack, you put a small piece on one end like so, put that in position, then I'm going to put another piece on the end, fold this over, so I've got the two sections folded over, fold the front of the box up, pull that down so I can see where the strip is going to fit, take another small piece add it onto this front element. Say take an image, so I've got this speaker, so that will sit on there like that. This will fold up and I can see the piece, the pop-ups folding up, and the speaker is not going to be any higher than the front of the box. So you might want to just do some planning and think about placement of your elements before you actually stick anything in with glue. So I'm going to put my pieces together now. So I've got 2 strips which are the same length. I'm going to use these for the keyboard, which is going to be at the back. So I'm going to add glue onto this square. So let's stick that one into place. Now I'm going to add glue to the end 2 squares, fold those under and fold up the front of the box. So those 2 squares are collapsing in and they should stick in the right place. So once that's dry, you pull that down. They're now adhered into place and I can now stick my keyboard on the front. So with these 2 pieces, the 2 speakers, I want to have them as near as the front as I can. If I sit them so that the highest point is at the highest point that they would need to be on the front, so for instance like that, I know that I can have my strips coming up to here in theory. Let's test the theory. So that's my 1/2 inch strip. Let's say that's there. So I put my first 1/2 inch score line on that pencil line. So there's my pencil line, my first score line. I've got my second score line and now I'm going to trim to here. So let's stick this one in place. Just move those. So this one will have glue. This will come under. That will fold up. Okay, that's good. Now, if I stick my speaker on, so when that closes, you can see that is just enclosed. Can you see the top point is just enclosed? So that's one way of working out the positioning of your pieces. So I'm going to carry on with the rest of my elements using this method. Here's the final decorated piece. I've added some embossed paper onto the front, and again this is 5 7/8 by 3 7/8. 2 pieces onto the side. This is 1 7/8 by 3 7/8. And some embellishments. Some of these were from an old magazine, and the papers and the die cut elements are from the Music Maker paper pad and stamp and die set from Made to Surprise by Sam Callcott. So this opens out like so. We've got our pop-up elements on the front and then our gift box inside. Overall, I'm really pleased with how this has come together, and of course you could make it to any theme you so wish, and you can obviously change up the size of the gift box to suit your needs and then resize any of the other elements accordingly. So there we have today's project. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel, and until next time, thanks for watching.